Hi everyone, I'm Steph from Simply Rhino. Welcome to today's webinar, Rendering Jewellery with V-Ray 2.0 for Rhino. Our presenter is Vassil from Chaos Group. Vassil is going to deliver us a web-based masterclass focusing on the details of the rendering process for jewellery design. He's going to be working with a project in V-Ray 2.0 for Rhino, and you're going to learn some specific tools such as V-Ray DomeLight, V-Ray Material, Express Toolbar, Lens Effects, VRmats and V-Ray RT, and see how they can become an integral part of your design workflow. You'll go through all the adjustments and setups by using the V-Ray RT, then once the overall setup is done, we'll switch to production render for adding advanced features and effects. Today's webinar is going to be looking at two scenes. One is a jewellery ring, courtesy of Mayor Hoffman, and the second is a watch built in-house at Chaos. I'm going to hand over now to Vassil. I believe he's going to start with the ring. Over to you, Vassil. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, let's say we have a model that we just built or we are in the process of building, and what we want to see is basically how it's looking, how it's reacting to light, because after all, whatever we do, we want to light it and shade it so it will be appealing not only to us, but let's say to our client or someone else. So there we go, we have our model done, and just a quick representation of how it looks like is a very good idea to use the V-Ray DomeLight because it's very intuitive to use. So I can, for example, just select it and start tweaking it. So let's say I want more yellowish light rather than pure white light, and there we go. So that's a really great idea to have a look at the scene you're rendering, the scene you're creating. So let's put it back to white. But this is, of course, not the only thing that you can do with the V-Ray DomeLight. So currently, I will just disable that, and there we go. We have no light. So what we can do is we can create from the V-Ray Express toolbar a predefined environment. So let's say this is a pre-made studio setup, and there we go. As you can see, we have directional shadows, some highlights coming from one direction to another, and this is really cool because with these presets you can easily light your scene immediately without actually tampering with any tweaks or setups. The cool thing is that it's over here inside a new layer, so I can turn it off. There we go, and I can create a new with completely different setup. So this is something that you can easily use. So let's lower the intensity, and not only that you can use all the time to do testing or final quality renderings, but you can also tweak them. So for example, this one has an HDRI, a studio setup of an HDRI plug inside the actual dome light. So this is really handy to use. So let's turn it off again. We can use a image-based lighting of real locations. So this is an office environment. Let's lower that, actually lower it much more. And there we go. So this is a really good idea to start working with your models, to actually start seeing what's there before deciding whether you want to change some parameters. So let me deactivate that and select my dome light that I was using at the beginning, and let's enable it. And if you have your own custom HDRIs, you can always just enable the texturing of the dome light and just select the proper HDRI. So currently I have a kitchen image, so let's use this one. There we go. Actually, this is quite strong for my scene, so let's lower it, and let's find different position. So as you can see, it's really giving me this natural environment as if this scene was a real one inside let's say a room. So let's put, okay. So another way of lighting the scene would be to use the studio setup. So let's create a studio setup. Now these are just a predefined lights, again like the dome light, that you can use to do that. So I just lower that intensity, and there we go. Now once you're happy, well, let's say the gem is big enough or small enough, or the all the bezels are in place like you want them to be, you can start shading, but I will come back to that in a few moments. So let's first disable the softboxes, and again I want to continue with my dome light. I just want to continue on the topic with the image-based lighting. So again, let's plug the texture. Again, this one, just remember to set it to environment spherical and click OK. So let's just find the proper amount of intensity that will be good enough for the current scene. So now it's looking really nice. And what we can do, if we don't like where our highlights are coming from, we can always rotate this image. So for example, I can rotate the image in 45 degrees, and you can see I'm moving the shadows. So now this is actually exactly the opposite way that I want it. So I'll just go with, let's say, 300 degrees. There we go. So now I have a completely different location of my lights and my shadows relative to what I want to emphasize on. And this is how you can actually create a really basic setup to light the scene and get to know what it will look like in the end. Now I can, if I'm not happy with the fact that I'm rendering only with a single material, I can always go to my material editor and add some materials. Currently I have enabled them all, and all I have to do is just get rid of the override material. So we just have to wait a few seconds to load all the materials. There we go. And these are the materials that are used for the final image. Of course, the studio setup that I'm using is not the same as this one, so the light conditions are different. But anyway, you can get to understand really easily with just a few clicks. I can get rid of this HDRI image and just plug a different one. Okay, so we'll just switch to another scene where I want to talk about the color mapping, because this was just a quick preview, just a quick way, just a quick glimpse of how you can examine and determine whether your model is okay or not okay. So I want to go into the color mapping settings, because this is a really important parameter that needs to be examined before you continue. Let's say you have built the model, you have done some testing with the dome light that I just showed you in the real-time rendering, and you're kind of happy with what's going on, but you need to continue and create custom shaders, custom lights to be placed, and you want to make sure that everything is correct. So this is the V-Ray RT again, but since we want to go through the whole process of rendering, I will be using actually the production renderer. So just stop that, and I will just cover a few topics of the sampling and the color mapping. So currently I'll be using the linear multiply, gamma 2.2, and linear workflow enabled. This is the setup that I'm usually using because I don't want to tamper with my colors here in 3D. I would rather do that in post, but anyway, I'll show you the different modes and what you can do with them. So first of all, let's have a look. This is my dome light. There we go. And maybe it's a bit brighter. What I want to know is to have a setup to start working with before I start adding the actual whites and the shaders. So here I'm rendering with some predefined it's all brute force anyway. So just there we go. It's a brute force method. Let's enable it. And there we go. So now I'm rendering with purely brute force, so I want to make sure that no other settings are coming my way. I don't care about the other settings. I just care about the sampling, the speed of my sampling, and the color mapping that I'm using. So currently this is with gamma 2.2. I can set it to 1, which basically means that no gamma correction will be added to my colors and my images that I'm using inside V-Ray. So as you can see, the dark areas have become even darker because I have no gamma correction applied. So this is really important to always set 2.2 because you want to make sure that all the colors are properly displayed on your monitor. So there we go. It's this is what we want to make sure that is always set to 2.2. So everything that is being plugged, like HDRIs, actually HDRIs most of the time are linear, but let's say I'm working with JPEGs, PNG, TIFFs, images, these all need to be gamma corrected so they can be rendered linearly and then be with gamma 2.2 applied at the end. So this is the linear workflow that I can disable. And there we go. Now this is washed because it has no linear workflow applied, which basically means that we need to enable linear workflow so we can get a proper linear image at the end and have it with only gamma applied once, not twice, or without any gamma. So I'll just enable linear workflow. Keep in mind that you can still have linear workflow, but you can enable don't affect colors. Okay, just there we go. And when don't affect colors is enabled, that means that we can have all gammas inverted when they are plugged, like JPEGs, TIFFs, as I mentioned. Then the entire calculation of V-Ray will be done linearly, but in the end we will not apply any gamma correction to the final image. So if I will be rendering like this, I will need to apply the gamma in Photoshop or whatever other post software I'm using. So if I'm rendering like this and I'm currently want to apply the gamma later in post, for preview purposes, you need to enable the sRGB button here so you can see the final result without actually applying the gamma. So this is just a quick glimpse of how the color mapping works and why you have these options here. Now what you can do is you can switch to Rhino, which at its default is basically a linear multiply. So let's render it. There we go. So this is a linear multiply mode. But if I start tweaking the burn value and setting it to something lower than 1, then we are starting to be in exponential mode. So it's a blend between linear and exponential. So if I set that to 0, this is exponential. Now with exponential, what we're doing is we're basically clipping the bright areas of our image, and this is something that I'm not a big fan of, but people tend to use it so they can balance and make the final image more subtle and more appealing. So this is a viable option as well. So Rhino is a blend between linear and exponential. Now I'm mentioning this because it's really, really important to understand that you have to decide which mode you want to use when you want to start working. Okay, so currently will be rendering with linear, and let's render back our watch. There we go. Now the next thing that I want to make sure is that my sampling, if I will be using the production render, is fast enough for my test renderings. So what I want to do is go to my image sampler anti-aliasing and tweak those settings. Now currently I have some noise coming from my brute force, so I can raise that to a higher value, the subdivisions. And as you can see, the noise is starting to vanish. I just want to make sure that the quality of this is good enough, and the only thing I want to temper with is the image sampling. So let's raise the light subdivisions as well. And now we should be okay. Oops, this is a wrong viewport. And there we go, it's almost noise-free. Okay, but one thing we notice is that the speed has dropped, and this is something that I want to show you guys how you can tweak really easily. Once you set up these and you say, okay, the quality is good, but I want to do some testing, we actually don't need to tweak all of these. The only thing that is necessary is to go to the image sampler anti-aliasing and just take the noise threshold value and set it to something higher, let's say 0.03. And you can see the noise is back, but at least I know that once I'm happy with my result, the only thing I need to do is just put that to the default 0.01, and everything else will be high quality. So this is something that I wanted to share with you guys that I usually do. I usually set up some high values, but the only thing I temper with is the image sampling, and that makes things really easy for me to have just one place to globally control almost everything. So here I have, okay, let's put it to 0.5, and again, it's really fast, and the noise is actually, it doesn't bother me right now because I'm focusing on relatively different matters right now. Okay, so the next thing that comes after we have determined what type of color mapping I want is the actual materials, because once we are done and we can use a controlled environment setup. So here again is the watch, and just again the DomeLight is here, and I'll just hit the RT now because I want to easily shade my entire watch. There we go. And let's say I'm starting to do that, and I'm just going to use the DomeLight because I want to have a very uniform light conditions. I don't want to have some harsh highlights or shadows before at least I set up the basics of my materials. So let's open. Currently I have created all the materials, but I have reset them to their defaults. And here this material for the front ring is called gunmetal, so I'll just select the gunmetal. And for metals, I will strongly suggest you guys use some lower low intensity values, like 30, so it's darker. There we go. And let's add reflection. So just create a reflectivity layer. There we go. And of course, this is looking kind of plastic, so this is not what we want. The only thing you need to change in order to make it metallic is actually change the Fresnel. So 20 from 1.5, and there we go. Now it's become like a chrome, and of course the chrome is reflecting everything, so that's why it's looking so whitish. Now of course this DomeLight is giving me so uniform light conditions that actually I'm not sure what my materials are looking like. I just want to make sure that I'm doing the right things right now, so I'm just going to disable the DomeLight and instead of using this dome light, I will use another one that has some predefined lightings. There we go. This one is looking really, really nice. It's giving me some highlights, and now I'm actually seeing that this should not be looking like chrome. It should be more like rough, dark metal. So the glossiness is being controlled by these two parameters. I would strongly suggest you guys always stick with the same amounts for both, because this is more physically accurate. So the lower the value, the bigger the blurriness that we're getting. So there we go. We were starting to have some really, really cool highlights over here, and but still, I think it's way too bright. So what we can do now is actually select the reflection amount, the filter, and start lowering it. So this is the global amount of reflection. So let's put it to something like this. Oh, this. There we go. This will lower the amount, and we're going to see it over here. It's still, I think, too bright. There we go. Now it's starting to get darker and darker. But one thing that I notice is that our entire lighting is coming from very few directions, which is not good enough for me to determine whether I'm doing a proper material setup now. So what I want to do is I will change my lighting again. So without touching anything, the dome light, the new one from the V-Ray Express is still there, but I will add a different light setup, which is giving me also from the bottom. So this one is maybe much appropriate for what I'm doing. I also rotate it a little bit. There we go. So now I have a much more natural setup that I want. So let's continue with the material. Obviously, it's way too bright. So let's take the diffuse. So the diffuse portion is pretty much what I will be seeing over here, and the reflection part is what I will be seeing here. So let's lower that, and there we go. Now obviously this is way too dark, but I'm just gonna keep it like this. I don't want to put too much focus right now on that. Maybe that's too much. Maybe let's make it 75. There we go. And okay, let's continue with the rest of the materials. So here inside I have brushed material, as far as I remember, brushed gunmetal. So let's edit this one. And again, as I said, for metals you don't need much of a diffuse parameter, so let's just stick to something really dark. There we go. And let's add again reflection. Now as you can see, with the pure reflection it's looking really, really dull. So let's change that. There we go. Now the amount is really, really high, so let's lower that. It doesn't need to be 100% reflective, and we need to put some blurriness to our reflections. And now what we can do is we can actually add the brushed texture. So let's add a brush texture. So this is the brush bump. There we go. So now I have a texture for my anisotropy as well. First we need to set like some amount. just to have a quick experiment. So what we're doing with the anisotropy, we are basically adding a direction of our highlights. We can also, instead of using a solid color for our reflections, we can add a reflection map. Again, the brushed reflections, so we will be determining where we want our reflections to be strong or not so strong based on the map. So there we go. Again, we're having this yellowish tint to our lighting, which is something I don't want though, so I will again change my lighting to something different. Okay, so obviously this is something that I want to change the rotation. I want you to guys see that with the V-Ray Express toolbar is really easy to work with. Again, it's yellowish. Let's have a look. It's a studio setup, but anyway, let's keep it as it is for now, just to determine our reflections. Maybe the glossiness is too low. Let's just add some more glossiness. There we go. And now for the anisotropy, we can select here a map for it, so we can determine again the amount of anisotropy based on a map. And I think it's far too rough now. I'm not sure if that's exactly as it should be. So what we can do is we can add an additional reflection layer on top of it as a coat layer. There we go. And this coat layer will help us get some clear coat reflections which are on the top of our brush metal. There we go. And the amount doesn't need to be that high. So it's, okay. Now what I will do is I will turn off these lights, and I will start creating my own lights because I want to see better what I'm doing. So let's, without turning off the RT, just let's create an area light. There we go. And now I will be able to determine much better whether my materials I just built are good enough so I can continue building more and more of these materials. Because after all, materials and lights are really connected, so you need to make sure that you are always having the right steps. So let's put that like this. And it should be way lower. There we go. So now you can see that I have the scratches, and I also have the gunmetal, which of course I need to change a little bit. So let's get back to it. First of all, the scratches are way too strong, so I'll just need to lower the bump amount. They're far too visible in my opinion. Even lower. And this metal here doesn't look that metallic currently, so I just want to increase the amount of reflection. There we go. Okay, so now it's much better. So this is a really easy and simple way of setting up all the necessary materials that you can do from this material editor. But there is also another way. You were seeing that I was doing HDRI environments, switching back and forth between different ones with a really easy clicks. But what you can do is just select the geometry that you want to work with and go to V-Ray Express materials, and we have predefined materials which you can use. So for example, I can select this aluminum material and just click on it, and it will be applied to the appropriate geometry. So if you want, you can just select certain parts. For example, here I have some, just give me a moment guys, so let's scroll here. These are like copper cogwheels, so let's select those and find a copper material, click, and there we go. Now of course these materials are fully editable. There are normal materials that you can adjust. So let's find the copper material. This is the one that I just created. I just applied actually, and I can start tempering with it. So maybe the color, I want more yellowish tint. Click and change the parameters. Maybe the highlights I'm not happy with, so let's change those as well. There we go. And these are fully editable materials that you can start applying. For example, I will just select these arms, this one and this one, and now just add a really dark material, metallic dark material to it. There we go. So this is a really easy way to achieve some fast lighting and fast shading. So with the HDRI environments and the studio lights, I was able to easily switch back and forth between different light setups and determine whether my materials are good. And then I can also throw these materials to get instant feedback of what things will look like, and of course start editing them once I'm happy with. So I'll just find a really rough material for this one. There we go. And how is it called? It's metallic blue foil. So let's find it. Metallic blue foil. It's far too strong, so let's lower the amount of reflectivity, just darken the reflection amount, and there we go. So maybe not that much. Okay, it's stuck. I'm not sure why, but it gets stuck. Now let's click OK, and just added a white reflectivity, but I can lower the amount of Fresnel here because it doesn't need to be that much. So this one should be like this, and there we go. So these are kind of metallic wheels. So this is for the material. So now the next thing that I want to show you guys is how to build the actual light setup that you want to have for the final rendering. Now let's say you have done or partially done your materials, you have applied them, and you want to start adding lights that will kind of highlight and emphasize on your model. So there we go. Let's again use the V-Ray RT. Okay, it should be rendering. There we go. Now these are the final materials. Now I just want you to guys see how strange the watch looks like with the dome light. This is just because I'm using a plain light. So let's first delete it, and we can start experimenting again with studio setups. There we go. This is one. But of course, this is not what I'm looking for. So let's deactivate this one. And let's create a different one. Now this is looking better, but still not there. So I will not use those. I want to show you how easy it is to use the V-Ray area lights that we have. So let's make that smaller again. And let's start creating area lights. Now the first thing that I want to do is make lights that will kind of go over all the detail of the watch and capture all the highlights and the edges that I want to show to my clients. So first thing is I'm going to use the lights with lower intensity. I don't want to use the built-in, it's 30, so let's make it 5. Doesn't need to be that strong, and I will work with invisible lights. So let's make it more to the front. I want to capture more of this area, and I also might squish it a bit. There we go. So this light will make sure that it catches the top highlights. This is just a test that I'm doing now. It doesn't necessarily have to be the final thing, but I just want to make sure that I'm doing some testing currently. So there we go. I'm getting this area here, this edge. I'm also having this area here. So this is something that I want to keep for now. Just make sure you're working in the correct layer, because then you can create different setups and hide them. For example, I have the final setup here, just I'm not using it. So next, let's continue adding oops, I'm sorry guys. So there we go. Now this light, I want to start showing some of the strap. So there we go. Now of course this is too much, and I'll just rotate it a bit like this and place it maybe over here. But of course, that's just testing now that I'm doing, just trying to find the correct setup. I don't want to say that this is something that I want to keep no matter what. So let's again lower that. It doesn't have to be with very, very bright lights. You can always just work with some lower values, place more lights. It gets much more interesting than using just a single light with very bright values. So there we go. Now what I really want is to make this part visible, because currently it's very dark, and this is the most important part. Now let's continue adding. There we go. Now, as I said, don't forget to make them invisible. Now, currently I'm seeing it, so let's make it invisible. And here I will have to just place it exactly on the front. Now, what you're seeing now is that I'm having this nasty reflection on the glass. So what I can do is just remove it from my reflections. So just keep in mind that when I have blurry reflections, I'm using the specular. When I have pure reflections for the glass, I'm using reflections. So since the glass has pure reflections, I just removed it from effect reflections, but I'm still getting all the blurry effects that are inside my watch. So I'm having a direct light right in front of my camera. I'm not seeing the light, which is really, really cool, and I'm not seeing the nasty reflection inside my glass. So this is something that I really enjoy when I'm doing this kind of renderings, because you have all the tricks to make it work better than would be in real life, because in real life you don't have these little tricks that you can play with. So here we go. I'm just balancing the final look. Now one thing that I want to do is I want to put some highlights over here to kind of make all the shape of the watch visible. So what I can do is just grab a light again and just place it over here. Of course, as I said, make it invisible. You don't want these lights to be visible. Okay, let's rotate that to 180 degrees and place it at the bottom. There we go. Now I want to follow the shape of the strap in the watch, so I'll just place it maybe kind of like this. Okay, maybe that's too much. And let's again lower that value, and there we go. So I'm having that. I can make it even bigger, so let's copy, paste. Let's have it on the other side. And okay, that's far too much. Or what we can do, because currently I don't like that, is we can just get rid of those. Just place a single one at the bottom. There we go. And you can see that I'm starting to globally control the entire highlight. So I will just push the light further the back, so I can just get these nice lines instead of harsh highlights. This is a really cool way of controlling that. So the only thing now that's left is just copy that light and just place it on the other side. And this is how you can create a really nice and custom light setup. Now obviously this one I don't want to have it exactly the same intensity, so I'll just lower it a lot. Well, not maybe it's too much, of course, and I can just place it maybe a little bit different. And the only thing that's left is just take care of a few dark places that need to have lighting, and you're ready to go. Now what you are seeing here for the strap, guys, is a displacement applied to my strap. So let's let me show you. It's which material is it? Strap main. So here, this is a regular metal material on which I have applied a displacement map. This is, it's over here, so that's the thing that I'm using to get the displacement on my watch. And as you can see, it's working in real time, so it's really cool. Okay, so I guess this webinar will be a bit longer than initially we have said. So I hope you don't mind, because I have really cool things that I want to show you. So the next thing is, once you're happy with the lights and you're happy with the materials, what you can do, guys, next is start working with a physical camera or simulate optics. So again, let's hit render. And this is the ring that I was showing you at the beginning. Now, as you can see, it's just a plain render with these are kind of the final lights that I'm using for this image. and 1, 2, 3, 4 lights. What I want to do is actually I want to add a physical camera properties. So there we go. This is the camera, and of course you might want to do that in post, add some flares and so on, but I prefer working here with the physical camera. You just enable it, and the first thing you'll notice is that it's getting dark and it has zoomed in. So let's first override the focal length, and of course when we're talking about some product shots, and if you want to have some shallow depth of field, you can of course work with longer focal lengths. I really like working with 60, 70, and now it's getting darker because just like a real world camera, the longer the focal length, the darker it gets. So let's compensate that with some lower f number values, or put more light. There we go. So actually we're quite dark, still dark. Okay, let's maybe that's too much. Let's go to 50. There we go. So currently what we can do is just lower the shutter speed. There we go. You can do that in many different ways. I can increase the ISO. It works exactly as a real world camera. There we go. Now we have overblown it. Now I want to keep the f number really, really low, because this is the thing that will determine the amount of depth of field. These two I can set to my liking, so let's lower that to 100. And there we go, maybe that's 200. And this is kind of what I'm looking for. So now I have physical camera, I have all the things, all the ingredients to make it look like a picture. So let's enable the depth of field, and it's getting really, really blurry. Now one thing that we have added here, guys, is let's override the focal distance. Now of course this is something that you need to guess the distance between where you're standing and where your geometry is. So what you can do is you can use this new button and just hit somewhere, but of course I need to enable the snapping, and it will, there we go, it's so shallow, the depth of field, that currently I'm having only here. So what we can do is let's put that to 4, oops, 34, that's definitely not what I wanted. 3.5, there we go. Now we're starting to see, let's compensate it with some more light coming from the ISO, and there we go. We are working with a physical camera, and you can simulate all sorts of effects. Now when we're talking about jewelry, there is one more thing that it's really, really important, and these are the dispersion and the caustics. So let's switch to my next scene. There we go. So let me just have a quick look at my settings, and in the meantime we'll start the V-Ray RT again. There we go. Same scene, same setup. The only thing that I want to show you here is that if I switch to the production render, I can enable caustics, which they work on the behavior of the light. So let's render. There we go. Now I have set it up to some really low settings here. As I said, I really like working that way because this is a way of fast determination of the quality. Now one thing that everyone knows is that when you have a refractive or very reflective materials, you get caustics, these nice light splotches. So one thing that you can do is apply those in post, but you can also create those in a physically accurate manner based on the index of refractions of your geometry, of course, in the shape. So I have set up caustics, and what I will do is just enable these. Let's draw a region over here. Keep in mind you can do that with the production render. Instead of rendering the entire image, you can just render certain regions. So there we go. Now you can see I'm having a really nice refractions inside, dispersion, and caustics outside. So this is something that it's really cool that you can add, but of course it takes a little bit of time to calculate. So keep in mind you can really make a high-end simulation in no time. The search distance is the distance around your geometry where you will find those, or where V-Ray will be looking for. So I'll just lower the max photon because this is determining the sharpness or the blurriness of those caustics. Currently 1000 was quite a lot. I want to make them sharper. There we go. They're even more and more visible. So let's lower that. It's really cool. You can use this in some sort of setup. What you can do is go to the VRB channels and select the caustics render element. So let's render with it. And now I think I'll have caustics, which will be very useful. I can do some post compositing with that render element, and I can determine how strong and pronounced those are. Of course, this is not very realistic currently. This is just a way of controlling those caustics. That's my point. And you can save the file. Now currently I have saved the file, but I can create a new map based on the new parameters. So let's hit render. Now it will be a bit slower than before. Did I hit render, guys? I'm not sure if it's actually rendering. Let's enable the progress window. Yep, it's building the photo map. So let's just wait a bit for it to calculate it, and I will just want to have a look at the new calculation. There we go. So this is actually how it should be looking like, because I was changing the max photons but was using the old map, so it was kind of not what it should be. Now is what it should be. So this is how it's supposed to look like with the caustics. Okay, so I'll just disable those for now, and I want to show you something else. So let's again hit render for the entire image to, so we can see it. There we go. Now one thing that many people want to do is have the ability to change the floor or the background once the rendering has been completed. So they use the alpha. Now currently our alpha is not good because we haven't detach the floor from the rendering process, and this is something that is not very good. So what we can do is use the V-Ray options, V-Ray properties, or the wrapper material. So let's go to the materials, and we have floor. So I'll just create a wrapper material, which basically will serve as an additional options that I add to my floor. Now currently I can pick any material that will be inside the wrapper. It's the floor. I don't know how it guessed, but it did, so I guess it's pretty smart. apply material to selection. So I just applied the wrapper material. Let's rename it wrapper MTL, and I know that this is being applied to my floor. So let's hit render. And as you can see, not much change. Now the reason for that is that I haven't actually applied any new options. I just applied the material, but it's still in its default. So first I want to make a this floor a matte surface. I want to tell it to catch the shadows and be visible in the alpha. So there we go. Now we're not seeing it, but I can make it visible later. Just give me a moment, guys. So let's. One thing that you need to do is just apply for the background. So just for the reflection black, for the refraction also black, and I want to have a white background because I want to see how it will look like. There we go. So now currently I'm using the white from the background and I'm removing the floor. I just want to use the floor as a shadow catcher. So let's turn that off because the alpha is still not working. So let's continue with the tweaking. Let's put the alpha contribution to 0. And there we go. I just said that the floor should contribute the alpha 0. So it's not in the alpha. And I have the ring detached from everything else, which is really cool. I can use that in Photoshop and just put any background I want. But there is still one thing that we need to resolve, and this is the shadows. As you can see, there are no shadows. I'm casting lots of shadows, but none of them are in my alpha. So let's stop that, and let's put that to -1. So -1 basically means that it should catch the shadows that I just told it to. So again, switch to my alpha, and there we go. So this is a really cool way of changing the background after you have rendered. It's just a very simple, very fast and straightforward setup that you can use to do that. Now once you're happy with these settings and these setups, you know that you'll be going to some compositing, although basic, you can go and enable all the VFB channels that you want. You can enable GI, diffuse, the lighting, you can use the reflection, the refraction, of course, the shadow if you want, the specular, and you can use Z-depth for simulating depth of field if you're not rendering with depth of field from within V-Ray, and hit render. So now when you start rendering, you have all the available render elements to when you go to Photoshop and or any other post software to actually be able to change and temper with any of those. So there we go. This is the alpha, the caustics, which I'm not currently, I have disabled the diffuse filter, the reflections. You can see the GI, the lighting. This is the reflection, refraction, shadows, and of course the specular. So with all these render elements, you'll be able to do that. One other thing is that you can select, let's say, the diamonds and use the ID color of them. So the ID was red, here is red, the other one was blue, and I think the third one will be green. I have used those RGB values. And what you can do is, again, go to the VFB channels and use render IDs, material IDs, all sorts of IDs to create masks that you can temper with afterwards. So let's draw a region. and let's have a look at those material IDs. There we go. The RGBs that I have assigned to my materials. So with those masks, I can easily change the color of my diamond from blue to something else in Photoshop. Okay, so guys, I guess this is it. It took me an hour to complete this short course. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
Okay, Vassil, hi. It's Paul here. Thank you very much for that. I think what we're going to have to do is follow up on some questions, but part of the reason for organizing this this webinar, other than showing off these interesting features in V-Ray for Rhino for jewelry design, is to also highlight an event that's happening next week on the 14th of April at the Goldsmiths Centre in near Hatton Garden in London. There's full details of this on our website, and we'll also attach a slide to the recording of this webinar to give some more details and a link to that. But if anyone's interested now, please do take a look on our website and look for the Digital Bench event. We do, of course, supply these tools, Rhino, V-Ray for Rhino, and all the other key plugins for Rhino, and training services at the same location from the Goldsmiths Centre in London. So lastly, I just wanted to thank again Vassil and Steph for help putting this together, and to the Chaos Group generally for helping us organise this. And we'll say goodbye to everybody at this point. So thanks a lot, Vassil.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.